live, but you ain't got nobody there yet, so.
I'm here.
Me and you's all we need, ain't Diane?
That's right.
Alright, let's hit record on this.
Yep.
Hope I have better luck than I did last time.
You can do it. Alright.
We were around the campfire last night, so I was probably too far away.
Yeah. Alright, Nina tells me that we are on Facebook Live and our Zoom
You got one person
is up
watching.
and going. We got Diane, that's all I need. Diane will
And
back.
I'd say you've got Dennis too up there.
There you go, Dennis is around there somewhere. But anyhow, we'll go ahead and get started here. And Nina tells me this morning that we need to take up prayer requests this morning. So, Jimmy, you're the one writes them down there. So, whenever you hear them, just write them down. If you got one, just speak right up.
Remember my nephew, he's coming home from New Orleans this week to Louisville. He's a month behind when he normally comes home. And they can get, they're accepting horses at Churchill Downs the 11th.
Alright, remember this. Somebody else.
Sally Hornsby, you cousin, remember her?
Remember Sally Hornsby.
Hey Diane, Vaughn Hornsby doing?
Hey,
Diane, how's Vaughn?
I have no idea. I have not. The last time Bobby was over here, he told Dennis she was doing really good, and that was sometime in the middle of last week.
Okay.
Guys, remember Jimmy Williams? He broke his leg this last week.
Alright.
I think he fell off the lawnmower.
Remember this.
Then I saw the lawnmower up for sale on his daughter's page the next day or two. Or a lawnmower. I'm assuming it was Jimmy's.
Well, he may either have to sell the lawnmower to finance the recovery, or he's mad at the lawnmower one.
Jimmy's tough, I tell you.
Yeah,
He's
remember this.
Still remember Jackie and her girls. She was a little bit better yesterday, but you never know from one day to the next.
Is she still at the hospital or is she back at the nursing
She's
home?
back at the nursing home.
Alright.
Remember Judy Williams? John Williams' wife Judy.
Remember
She's
this.
in the nursing home over at Laurel Creek. And not doing very good, Donna told me this week.
Remember this. Alright, remember Caleb and Bella out there are in the process of trying to buy themselves a house trailer. And we all remember that in starting out days and remember them through this.
Remember Connie Coyle. She's not doing very
Yep.
well right now. And her boys are having to take turns and staying with her, so to help.
Remember the revival.
Kevin says, remember Tracy's grandmother. She's in the nursing home in Manchester. Her dementia is getting worse.
Now, continue to remember them. They need your prayers.
Amen.
Alright.
Have they had any cases of the virus in Laurel Creek?
No.
Clay
It's
County,
amazing.
Clay County
That's
does
what
not
you
have
call nursing home.
any recorded cases, do they?
Clay County? I don't think
I
so.
don't think Clay County does.
I hadn't heard it.
No.
My parents were there in the 80s, so it's a real old nursing home.
Yeah.
And it wasn't new then.
No, I remember it being there when I used to go to vocational school right next door to it down there.
Well, in the 80s, what
Yeah,
Diane be talking
and that was
about.
the late 80s. Alright.
Actually, it was the late 70s because my parents died in 80 and 81.
There you go. Been there for a time.
Remember, my uncle Richard Urey, he's having shoulder surgery tomorrow.
Alright. Anybody else? Nobody on Facebook Live got any more? No? Alright, continue to lift all these names up in your prayers. And this morning we'll be in Lamentations 3. We'll start out in about verse 48. And, you know, we're all the time saying, let's do things a little different. You know, let's try something a little different. Kick the devil's feet out from under him this morning. So, Eddie Morgan, could you pray for our Sunday school lesson and lift these names up in prayer for us this morning?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
We got you. Go right ahead.
Alright, let's test her out there. Heavenly Father, Lord, we thank you for this opportunity to come to you this morning, Lord. We thank you for watching over us during this time, Lord, keeping us all safe and sound. And Heavenly Father, Lord, we just pray especially for our country this morning. This virus, Lord, has got people concerned, Lord, and we're proud that they're looking to you for all the answers. And Lord, there's many out there that have kind of lost that desire, Lord, and we pray for them, Lord, that you might be able to stir their hearts, Lord, that they would look to you, Lord, and understand, Lord, that you're a giver of all good things, Lord. And Heavenly Father, Lord, we just pray this morning for our Sunday school lesson. This morning is 15th as he brings it before us this morning. And Heavenly Father, just be with him as he brings out your message, that we'll have a better understanding of our word. And Heavenly Father, Lord, as all the requests you mentioned this day, Lord, we just pray for each one of them, Lord. Just pray that you touch each and every one of them in that special way, Lord. Those that are sick, shut in this hour, Lord, we just pray that you just touch them. And Lord, we just pray for the ones in the nursing home this morning. Just be with those individuals and those caretakers, Lord. They're very special, Lord. We just pray for each one of them that you just touch them in that special way. And Heavenly Father, Lord, there's some that are in the hospitals, Lord. It seems like they're very, very sick. For the ones that's in the hospital this hour, Lord, we just pray for each one of those folks this morning. And Heavenly Father, Lord, we just pray for a revival that we've been having, Lord. It's going to be exciting to have another week. And Lord, we just pray, Lord, that maybe someone will just give their life to you, Lord, that they'll become a Christian and become dedicated to you, Lord, in your service. And Heavenly Father, Lord, we just ask you to be with the service today, be it Brother Keith, be it Brother Jim, Lord, and just watch over us, Lord. Forgive us where we sin against thee. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. All right. Thank you, Eddie. All right. Moving right on through the book of Lamentations. We are in
Chapter 3, verse 48, for anybody just tuned in.
chapter 3:48, as my wife said. And, you know, all the way through this, you kind of get this picture of Jeremiah. And he's been called the weeping prophet. And through all this, it is absolutely clear why he would have got that name, because of the devastation that he had seen of his, you know, as we might call it, his hometown, you know, where he grew up at, where God placed him in the world, you know. Here he is in Jerusalem, and as we talked about in the last few weeks, he seen folks lying dead on the ground that he'd seen grown up from a young child. And verse 48 says, "Mine eye runneth down with rivers of water for the destruction of the daughter of my people. Mine eye trickleth down and ceaseth not without any intermission, till the Lord look down and behold from heaven. Mine eye affecteth my heart because of all the daughters of my city. Mine enemy has chased me sore like a bird without a cause. They have cut off my life in the dungeon and cast a stone over me. and waters flowed over my head, and then I said, I am cut off. So, like we said, you know, here's Jeremiah with that broken heart, with tears in his eyes, no doubt, for the devastation that absolutely he can see. And here he is talking about the waters that have flowed over my head. You know, he feels like he's drowning. I mean, and we've all been to that point in our life at one time or another, like we are drowning with the troubles of life, drowning with situations that we have no control over, and you know, like we are right here today. You know, we are drowning in, you know, what we seem to have been overtook with this virus. We've seen sick people all around us, you know, families that have not even been able to bury their loved ones as they would like to because of it. And, you know, but the good news is God's still in control through it all. God still has it, you know. And Jeremiah, even though he's overwhelmed, right on in the next few verses, you know, he, as Jimmy likes to say, he goes to his prayer closet. You know, he goes to that place where just him and the Lord. And and my thought about the next few verses here is, you know, calling on God from the lowest place, you know, in the dungeon, in the pit, in the low place in life. And through the next several verses, it starts out there with one I. You know, Jeremiah's talking about himself. He says I. You know, over the next several verses after that, it says thou. You know, he's referring to God. You know, he starts out in verse 55. He says I, Jeremiah, he says, called upon thy name, talking about God. Called upon thy name, O Lord, out of the low dungeon. You know, Jeremiah had experienced that low dungeon before. You read back into Jeremiah's writings and you find that he was lowered down into that well, that mud and mire, and there he was in such a desolate place. And no doubt he has got that thought in his mind when he's writing that down. You know, he says, I called upon thy name out of the low dungeon, out of a low place in his life. And then 56 says, thou hast heard my voice, hide not mine ear at my breathing, at my cry. Thou drewest near in the day that I called upon thee, and thou said, fear not. O Lord, thou hast pleaded the causes of my soul, and thou hast redeemed my life. O Lord, thou hast seen my wrong, judge thou my cause. Thou hast seen all their vengeance and all their imaginations against me. Thou hast heard their reproach, O Lord, and all their imaginations against me. The lips of those that rose up against me, and their device against me all the day. Behold, they're sitting down and they're rising up. I am their music. Render unto them a recompense, O Lord, according to the works of their hands. Give them sorrow of heart, thy curse unto them. Persecute and destroy them in anger from under the heavens of the Lord. So Jeremiah calling out to God here, you know, from that low place, from that dungeon, you know, from, we might say, the bed of affliction, you know, the place where we heard at. And that's where we find Jeremiah here, calling out to God. And, you know, when do we draw closest to God? When do we call upon him the most? Not when the sun's shining and we have life by the tail. No, it's not. It's when life has us by the tail. It's when we call upon God the most. And this is exactly what Jeremiah's doing here. And I really like all the times through this next part down through here, all the times where Jeremiah is written down, thou heard me, Jeremiah says. God heard his voice, and he begs of God, hide not thine ear. You know, read some in the last week or two that Jeremiah felt that God had shut his ears up, that he wasn't listening to him. But here he is calling upon God, to listen to his prayer. And then he points out there that God drew near, verse 57, that God drew near to him in the day that I called upon him, he said. And we have that assurance today, through the work that Jesus Christ did, that through that advocate we have with Jesus, that God will hear us, that the work that Jesus Christ done says we're worthy. We're worthy now, not because of all the good deeds that we've done in life, not because we're such pleasant people to be around, not because we do good things for each other, and no doubt we do all those things from time to time, but beside the righteousness of Jesus Christ, we have no hope. But in that righteousness, in that work that Jesus done, we have assurance that we can call upon him. And that's what Jeremiah is pointing out here, that God will hear his voice. And, Lo Lord, thou hast pleaded the causes of my soul, and thou hast redeemed my life. God has. He's redeemed us. He's redeemed us through the work Jesus has done. And then Jeremiah goes on pointing out the vengeance that has been took out upon them. The people that have come in and put their city under siege. They had them surrounded for over a year while they starved to death in there. And toward the end of the chapter, we see the human side of Jeremiah. We see that in the last couple verses there. When somebody hurts us, or somebody hurts our children, hurts our loved ones, we want vengeance, don't we? And he calls upon God to carry out that vengeance upon these people that had encamped round about them, had starved them to death, had caused their women to boil their children for food. And here we see Jeremiah calling upon God to do that. And then verse 66 even says, persecute and destroy them in anger from under the heavens of the Lord. Think about that. The anger of God. Does any of us want the anger of God released on us? No, we don't. We absolutely do not. Because, think about that. The very God that just spoke and all creation was there. He spoke it into existence. Imagine what his anger can do to us. A people of unclean lips, as another prophet said. A people that, have no ground to stand on before a holy God. And then we never find Jeremiah, we never find him raising his hand against them. We never find him throwing rocks at at Nebuchadnezzar's armies. We never find him throwing rocks at the Edomites that had persecuted them there. But here we find Jeremiah, the human side of him, calling out, God, avenge our downtrodden place that we're standing in. Anybody got anything to add there? We finish up this last little part of chapter 3.
Keith, one of the things that puts me in mind of is Jeremiah's illustrating a righteous anger, for lack of a better word. And you go into the New Testament, and the Bible says, vengeance is mine, saith the Lord, I will repay.
Right.
And it's like you're pointing out, there's the human side that Jeremiah wants him to pay.
He
wants
does.
him to pay, but he's leaving it up to the Lord to take care of that.
That's right.
And what a great, because what you're talking about, what a great leap of faith that he has there, that he's able to let that anger and just lay it at God's feet. God, I know you're going to take care of this.
Yep.
And he leaves it to God. He has a right to be angry, and a lot of times we have a right to be angry but we just leave it at God's because that's what God has conducted us, or God has told us to do. So,
That's right.
what do you think about that?
Well, I don't know the chapter, verse, or book or whatever, but somewhere in the Bible it says, "Be angry and sin not." You know, and Jeremiah's doing that. You know, I mean, he's absolutely mad because I've heard you say this in the past. You know, we can get over somebody treating us bad sometimes, but boy, when you throw family in the mix, that's a whole other category, and that is the place where Jeremiah's standing. You know, like some of us that talk a little funny, maybe like I do, he says, "Them's my people," you know, that they have mistreated here. And that is the place where Jeremiah's standing. All right, anything else? All right, anybody on Facebook Live put anything on there?
Nope.
No? All right, then we'll move right on. We'll jump in with both feet into chapter 4. It says, "How is the gold become dim? How is the most fine gold changed? The stones of the sanctuary are poured out in the top of every street. The precious sons of Zion, comparable to fine gold, how are they esteemed as earthen pitchers, the work of the hands of the potter. Even the sea monsters draw out the breast, they give suck to the young ones, and the daughter of my people is become cruel, like the ostriches in the wilderness. The tongue of the suckling child cleaveth to the roof of his mouth for thirst. The young children ask bread, and no man breaketh it unto them. And they that did feed delicately are desolate in the streets. And they that were brought up in scarlet embrace dunghills. For the punishment of the iniquity of the daughter of my people is greater than the punishment of the sin of Sodom, that was overthrown as in a moment, and no hand stayed upon her." So Jeremiah's changed gears a little bit now, and he's talking about, you know, the young people that he's seen grow up, and he's talking about the gold becoming dim there, and he's actually sort of maybe referring to the things of the temple, but more than that, as verse 2 points out, the precious sons of Zion. That's who he's talking about. The young men and women there that Jeremiah had seen come up, no doubt children of, we might call them judges and sheriffs and and people in authority that had life pretty good before this. And now here they are, carried away off into captivity there by Nebuchadnezzar's army. And when they were behind the walls in Jerusalem, people looked upon them and compared them, you know, to a golden vessel, to a golden pot. And I got a ring on my finger here, and it's probably not the most valuable one that money could buy, but it represents something. It represents value. And when you look upon that ring, you think of the value of a marriage vow, things that are precious to you. And that's how that Jeremiah looked at those children, those young men, and all the people that lived around them there. They were proud of them. They thought a lot of them, just like we think a lot of our children. But then you move ahead a few verses there. It says, "How are they esteemed as earthen pitchers, the work of the hands of the potter." You know, the armies of Nebuchadnezzar that led them away, these people meant nothing to them. You know, they were prisoners of war. They were slaves now, led away, as Calvin taught us in the past, with hooks in their jaws most likely. There with that scar for the rest of their life, and marked by, we'll call it the sins of the world, marked by sin, led away to be not as much value to this army that had led them into captivity. And here they are. And then Jeremiah moves on to talk about nature.
We're in, Megan wanted to know where we was at. Lamentations.
Chapter 4, I'm sorry. if I didn't
Oh,
if I didn't make it clear. But anyhow, Jeremiah moves on to talk about nature a little bit now. Verse 3 talks about the sea monsters. And I never did find out what kind of an animal that Jeremiah was calling a sea monster. I think he's probably referring to a seal or a sea lion or something like that, that raises its young, that takes care of a small seal pup or a sea lion pup, whatever they're called,
What's
But,
called a jackal? Is that?
yeah, different translations. Some translations will call it a jackal, and I don't know. A jackal is like sort of a dog-like creature, but a sea monster is absolutely nothing like a dog. But anyhow, here we have Jeremiah talking about nature, about how nature takes care of its children, how nature looks out for its young. But some instances in nature that's not true, because he talks about the ostriches in the wilderness. And I did find out a little bit about ostriches, and it said that an ostrich will lay eggs and just go off and abandon them. How the species ever carries on like that, only God knows. But Jeremiah is talking about how that the tongue of this suckling child cleaves to the roof of its mouth because of hunger and thirst, because mom is not there to care for it, because mom is to the point of starvation and she's not caring for it anymore. No man breaks bread for this child, it says. They're in starvation there. And then talks about in verse 5, those that feed delicately. We might call that today those that got it pretty good, And a guy told me one time, he was in the trucking business, and his last name was Napier. And he said, my name's not Napier. He said, it's Napper. I said, well, what's the difference? He said, Napiers eat steak and Nappers eat soup, and that's kind of what it's pointing out here. The ones that eat the steak, that was the ones he was talking about. But now starvation has come, hard times are upon them. And here they are, in the streets, among dead bodies laying around, looking for a meal, looking for something to eat. It says, brought up in scarlet, but they embrace dunghills, it says. In other words, they're digging through the trash, through the remnants of what's been cast away, looking for a meal, looking for something to eat. And, verse 6 has a lot of conviction in it too, because these were God's people here that we're talking about. And, God passes judgment on all of us in one way or another. And it talks about the judgment that was on Sodom. And we all know how Sodom was judged. In a moment, they were gone from there to gone forever. Fire rained down from heaven. And here's the punishment upon these people. The anguish of seeing their children starve to death. Seeing their loved ones led away into captivity. Those that did make it out were enslaved forevermore. And, think about that. Which one would be better? To be judged as a child of God, or judged as a lost soul, which is what it's calling out on Sodom to be, lost folks. That's what Sodom represented. The world, the things, that ones that don't know God. And, think about that. It says Sodom was judged in a moment, overthrown in a moment, and no hands stayed on her. It was over just like that. Here we find Jerusalem, the mighty city, carried away into captivity, falling on hard times by the judgment hand of God here. Anything on that, on those few chapters?
Verses.
Or verses, rather. Alright, so move right on then. Verse 7 says, her Nazarites were purer than snow. They were whiter than milk. They were more ruddy in body than rubies. Their polishing was of sapphire. Their visage is blacker than coal. They are not known in the streets. Their skin cleaveth to their bones, and it is withered. It is become like a stick. They that be slain with the sword are better than they that be slain with hunger. For these pine away, stricken through for want of the fruits of the field. The hands of the pitiful women have sodden their own children. They were their meat in the destruction of the daughter of my people. The Lord hath accomplished his fury, and he hath poured out his fierce anger, and hath kindled a fire in Zion, and it hath devoured the foundations thereof. The kings of the earth and all the inhabitants of the world would not have believed that the adversary and the enemy should have entered into the gates of Jerusalem. For the sins of her prophets and the iniquities of her priests that have shed the blood of the just in the midst of her. They have wandered as blind men in the streets, and they have polluted themselves with blood, so that man could not touch their garments. And they cried unto them, Depart ye, it is unclean, depart, depart, and touch not. And when they fled away and wandered, they said among the heathen, They shall no more sojourn there. And the anger of the Lord hath divided them, and he will no more regard them. And they respected not the person of the priest, and they favored not the elders. So Jeremiah begins out here talking about the Nazarites. And, you know, we've talked about Samson and those that had took vows in the past. And was that what they were referring to here? I don't really think so, but I don't really have a definite yes or no answer on that. He's more like talking about those that were set apart. Those that were set apart for a purpose in the temple. Those in doing the work that kept the temple going there at the time. Those children of royalty, you know. Special people, we'll call them. You know, those that were set apart. Those that wore the nice clothes. Those that people looked upon and says, that young man has got it all together. And now we find them right here. It says their visage is blacker than coal. I come home from work like that sometimes. Lena says, don't you come in that house with them clothes on, you know. Don't you come in here nasty like that. And that's the image of what we're seeing here, you know. They had been in the finest places, grew up in to be set apart for a work in the temple, for a work doing God's work there. But here they are, wandering in the streets, covered in dirt. Maybe they had been sitting in ashes and sackcloth, covered up in black and dirt. Here they are, blacker than coal they are. And then says, their skin cleaveth to their bones. In other words, they're in starvation. You know, you've seen images on TV of starving people, people that have been malnourished, and you know, you can see their, old saying is, you can see their rib cage. They're about done. And that's the image that Jeremiah's putting out. And then, what a terrible thought here too, you know. You know you're going to die one way or another. And Jeremiah says, it's better for those that were slain with a sword than to be slain with hunger. Because, you know, nowadays we don't think about warfare with swords like they did then. But hand-to-hand combat at that time would have been with swords, with knives. And, you know, think about that. A terrible death to have a big long sword run through you, and you know, you probably didn't die right then. You probably lived for a time and bled to death. And you know, at the most probably an hour, 45 minutes it took you to for the life's blood to leave your body, for you to bleed to death and pass on. But then slain with hunger. Think about that. You know, here are these people behind this wall that are slowly dying with hunger. And he's read about the king's children that were slain in front of him before his eyes were taken out and his vision took from him. Jeremiah's pointing out how much better it is for them. You know, that death has come to them quickly. You know, that through this, better to be took on like that than slain with hunger here, to starve in the streets. And then Jeremiah talks about the hands of the pitiful women. The pitiful women there that, no doubt, before this started, bounced those children on their knee, and they were the most precious thing that a parent could ever have, is that small child. And you know, I know we've talked about this before, but we say, I would never, ever, ever, ever do that. Would you? If you were in this circumstance, you know, starvation staring you in the eye, and here's these women that, no doubt with tears, took the life of their children so that they could eat, so that they could live. And, you know, even if they survived through all this, imagine the mental part of that, you know. If they lived to be a ripe old age after they'd survived this, they would always have that thought in their head, what did I do to my child through this hard time? What did I do there? That thought would always be there. And like Jeremiah said, better to be slain with the sword than to suffer through this. And there it is, you know. And then verse 11 says, the Lord has accomplished his fury. God's anger that we talked about a minute ago has been poured out upon Jerusalem and kindled a fire in Zion, it says. Burned this temple, burned, you know, out the valuables of the people there and left them desolate. You know, some of them were left there, you know, to the poorest of the poor were left behind. Because they had nothing to begin with, and they definitely had nothing now. And then the kings of the earth it talks about, all those that were round about Jerusalem, as you might say their neighbors, had seen how well they had prospered there, had seen how good things were in Jerusalem. And now it talks about the kings of the earth. They couldn't believe that Jerusalem had been overthrown like it had. And the enemies have broken through the gates, come on in and plundered all that they had there behind this gate. And then verse 13 is the key to this whole book that Jeremiah's written down. Why did God do this? Because of the sins of her prophets. Because the ones that were supposed to be pointing them toward the right way, pointing them toward God, were the sins of the prophets and the iniquities of her priest. You know, we have a tendency to look out more for ourselves than for others. And that's exactly what these prophets and priests had been very guilty of taking advantage of the people. And they had, no doubt the people had seen their wrong actions. And verse 14 says, they have wandered as blind men in the streets and polluted themselves with blood. So here we find these priests that, according to Levitical law, when a leper came down with leprosy, and the leper was to come before the priest, and he was supposed to pronounce him clean or unclean, you know. And here's that priest that we're talking about. And now he himself has been polluted with blood, it says. No doubt from the dead people in the streets, from those that he'd seen there. And here's this priest calling out to the people, depart, get away from me, I'm unclean. Just like he would have told those leopards to do. Not leopards, but lepers. Alright, just like he would have told them to do. I'm unclean, you know, don't come near me. It's what these priests are doing now. And then they cried, depart, you know. And then verse 16 says, the anger of the Lord hath divided them. You know, he's broke them up, put them apart from each other. And, you know, here we find Jerusalem from, as the saying goes, from the pulpit to the pew. Everybody is fell upon hard times. Everybody's in trouble. Everybody's desperate. And maybe like a lot of us are today, you know. Maybe because those of us that are supposed to be calling out the gospel unto others have not done as we should. Just like, you know, Jeremiah was calling out to them, you know, this judgment's coming, this judgment's coming. But others were saying, you're wrong, Jeremiah, you're wrong. All is good in Jerusalem. All's going to be good in Jerusalem. And we've all read about how they put Jeremiah in prison because of that. They put him in that pit because he was calling out the truth. But the anger of the Lord now has divided them. All right, anybody got anything to add there about that? Nope, nobody? All right, everybody's either mad then or didn't get it, I guess, one of the two. All right, moving right on then. Verse 17. As for us, our eyes as yet failed for our vain help in our watching. We have watched for a nation that could not save us. They hunt our steps that we cannot go in our streets. Our end is near, and our days are fulfilled, for our end is come. Our persecutors are swifter than the eagles of the heaven. They pursued us upon the mountains. They laid wait for us in the wilderness. The breath of our nostrils, the anointed of the Lord, was taken in their pits, of whom we said, under his shadow we shall live among the heathen. And we'll stop right there for a minute. You know, imagine what verse 18 says. We cannot go into our streets. Whilst they were under siege from Nebuchadnezzar's armies, you know, they had this wall around Jerusalem. But all around the wall outside, the armies had set up, they called them siege machines. And they were big, tall towers, most likely on wheels. And they would roll them up close to the wall where the soldiers could get on top, look over into the streets, and when one come outside, you know, to enjoy the bright sunshine, even though times are hard, here would be an archer on that tower, most likely, to shoot an arrow at that person that came outside. And that's what Jeremiah is talking about here. We cannot go into our streets. The end is near. You know, desperation is upon them. And then all of us have seen an eagle probably in one place or another. And an eagle, the number leaves me of how fast they can fly, but they can dive at like astounding speeds. You know, they can swoop down into the water and catch a fish, you know, just like that. You know, swoop down. And no doubt they had seen eagles in the past, and Jeremiah's comparing their adversaries here to that eagle that's sitting up on a limb there waiting for us to come out. Just like a bird will do when a mouse scurries out in the field. They will swoop down and take them out. And that's what Jeremiah is comparing this to. And then the anointed of the Lord he's talking about, taken in their pits. The anointed that Jeremiah would be talking about would be the royalty, the king's family at the time. You know, they said at the time there that, you know, God put the king in place, that God put that family there to rule over them, and that's who he's talking to. The anointed of the Lord was taken in their pits. You know, we've read the account of how the king and his family tried to slip out through the back way, we'll call it, and the armies caught them, you know, how they caught them for sure. I don't know how that looked, and I don't think anybody really does for sure. But they were taken in their pits, it says. And then, under his shadow we shall live among the heathen, carried away to live under the shadow of Nebuchadnezzar's armies. Captivity, you know, under that shadow. They were in a place of imprisonment, and up on above them would have been the shadow of a soldier looking down upon them, keeping them in line, we'll say, keeping them under the shadow of that heathen that we're talking about. And then, moving right on, we'll read the last few verses of this chapter here. It says, verse 21 says, Rejoice and be glad, O daughter of Edom, that dwellest in the land of Uz. The cup also shall pass through unto thee. Thou shalt be drunk and make thyself naked. The punishment of thine iniquity is accomplished, O daughter of Zion. He will visit thine iniquity, O daughter of Edom. He will discover thy sins. So, the Edomites were Jerusalem's next door neighbors. And they were also Jerusalem's kinfolk. You know, we've all read the account of Jacob and Esau. And the Edomites were the descendants of Esau. And there was strife between them all the days of their life. We've read the account of how the older brother will serve the younger through the days. How that Esau sold his birthright for a bowl of soup that we talked about. That red soup, you know, that Esau sold his birthright. And, you know, sometimes we get a little sore about things. And that soreness was passed down all through Esau's family. Right on down through this. You know, the Edomites lived out there. And the word Edom, it's another Jewish word for red. Edom is. And you know, when we think about being mad, we usually relate that to the color of red. And you know, the Edomites, we've all heard the saying, he's a little bit red over that, you know. The Edomites were a little bit sore at Jerusalem. All down through the ages, right up to this point. And no doubt the Edomites told Nebuchadnezzar's army, over there's a place you can cross the creek. Over there's the easy way across that hill. They led them right into the gates of Jerusalem, the Edomites did. And no doubt Jeremiah knew that. Jeremiah knew the hatred that they had for Jerusalem. And all that started out over a bowl of soup. Bowl of pottage, it calls it. But as we might think of it, a bowl of soup was what that started over. But then one more time we find Jeremiah not raising his hand in anger, but calling on God to avenge at the end of this chapter, just like he did the last one. The punishment of thine iniquity is accomplished, O daughter of Zion, it said. So, you know, let that be a lesson to all of us. We get angry from time to time. Things are not done to suit us every time. And, you know, let God take care of it for you. Let God work out the problems we have in life. Just like the virus that we're suffering through right now. You know, God knows how the outcome is. And I believe with all my heart, on the other side of this, God will get the glory for it. I really believe that with all my heart. Just like Jeremiah knew that God's name would be glorified through the end of this. All right. As the old saying goes, if you want the last word, now's your chance. Anybody got anything to add?
Nobody moving?
I don't see nobody raising up to push buttons, so I guess everybody's satisfied then.
Debbie or Jim, do we have a special music
Yeah.
today?
What do we have for special music now?
Cause I didn't.
Check your messages. I'm a little late sending it to you, but it's on. I texted it to you a minute ago.
Oh well, if that's the case, then I'll put it on Facebook because my phone is recording. So if you're on live, check Facebook in just a minute, and we'll have our special music. And then Jim will be going live here in just a minute also.